Hi there folks, Hedley Widdop here. I'm Managing Director of Lion Selection Group, Melbourne-based mining investor. And today I'm chatting to Chris Patira, Managing Director of one of our large investments, Plutonic. Chris, I tell investors in Lion that Plutonic is the one investment that we have that could treble the value of Lion all on its own, subject to the kind of success that Plutonic could have. Can you talk me through what success might look like for Plutonic if you get there?
Success, with Plutonic, the way that we've purposefully gone out in search of, giant, supergiant, and what we call hypergiant mineral systems, and I think we've followed the right path to now generate the types of targets that could, yield the type of value that we're talking about, transformational for Lion and transformational for Plutonic shareholders as well. So ideally, I think what we're looking at, particularly with our Champion project, is making a major world-class discovery, perhaps an industry-defining discovery in the current age. But beyond that, it's there's the leverage, the scale up from the fact that we have 6,500 square kilometres, and unlocking one major discovery, given the footprints of the system that we see out there, is effectively unlocking major value at the mineral belt scale. Nothing like anything that's happened, particularly in this country, probably since the Macquarie Arc.
So a major scale discovery in an area where no one's thought of looking before. What was it that lured you out into the Simpson Desert in the Northern Territory to go looking for minerals? And in the 2 or 3 years that you've been gathering data, how's that perception changed? Do you still feel the same way as you did when you thought it's a great idea to go out there and look in the first place?
Yeah, definitely. There's two real driving reasons for us to having gone out there. And our other director, Amanda, who is not here with us today, but during her PhD, she developed some algorithms that take geophysical data and generate structures. And it's these sorts of structures that we sort of have used in the past to help guide us into areas where there is potential, or our perception potential, for tier 1 systems across Australia. And so we initially kicked this off early on by looking at all 4 of these major structures and where they go. In this case, gravity ridges. And it sort of led us to that area on the border of Northern Territory in Queensland. And we ended up opting to go explore the Queensland side initially, purely because I guess we've had a bit of exposure and we didn't really know much about NT. But while we're doing that, we looked over the fence in the data, not physically, and started to see these big white things all over the place. So at some point we acquired some better resolution data and concluded, after looking at the old data sets available in the NT, that they were massive quartz veins. So we quickly moved over to the NT, and we actually relinquished the Queensland side because the stuff that we had on our side's much more interesting, more exposure of the rocks. I'm not saying that the whole project is exposed. It's on a very thin cover, being the sand dunes and stuff like that. But in terms of getting out there on the first day, rocking up to a quartz vein that we saw from the satellite imagery, and it being a nice 1.5 kilometre exposure of a 40-metre wide quartz vein with beautiful low sulfidation epithermal textures all throughout. Couldn't have asked for anything better, and that's where we've been ever since. So, initially when we got out there, we'd also heard stories of Lassiter's Reef and being out in that part of the world. There's an episode on Discovery Channel, I think, where a bloke called, the Bush Tucker Man in an earlier version, but a bloke called Bill DeCarly had done a lot of work in trying to go through the folklore and the process of validating historical accounts of Lassiter's Search, and he ended up out there basically. We went to that spot too. Again, major quartz veins everywhere. That's in the Asgard Dome project. So after a little bit of work and getting some assays and seeing that these things were fertile, we quickly expanded the project to what it is now, which is about 6,500 square kilometres. And you've been there. It's very rare to stand on any outcropping exposure and for it to not be a quartz vein with some mineral in it, or weathered mineral on oxides, or alteration footprints associated with larger scale hydrothermal systems.
So you went out there thinking, interesting place to start looking, and you spotted quartz veins, which probably got no right to be there, except for the fact that they are. So that needs explaining.
That's right.
Those quartz veins are there, great start. Should you be seeing things like copper and gold in those, or would you expect not to? And if you do see copper and gold, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, look, given the degree of weathering that we've seen out there, and there have been a couple of very obscure holes drilled near some of our stuff, and it's fairly consistently weathered deeply down to 50 metres. You can see in the logs of particularly sulphides, no sulphides get down to 50 odd metres below the surface, all of a sudden you start to get sulphides.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean you won't get some grades, because we do. We have gotten up to 1.3 gold, copper up to 0.3% with oxide copper. But in the majority of samples we do collect, you can clearly see sulphides that have been weathered out, basically. Yep.
So now we've got quartz veins, copper sulphides and gold that need to be explained somehow.
That's right.
And you've got IP targets as well. Can you just explain very briefly what's an IP target and what does that mean in the context of looking for an ore deposit, and big or small?
Sure. So before we kick off with the IP, we take all the data that we can get our hands on, being geological data, that even if it's a bit outdated from the geological survey, the outcropping veins, the footprints that we see, and then we've done a hyperspectral survey mapping out the mineral chemistry exposed at the surface, the rock chip geochemistry. So, it's not the right environment with lots of transported cover for soils. So we opted to stick to analysing outcropping rock chips, both the veins and alteration of the sedimentary rocks or the host rocks. So we use that information, let us know where we feel is the best place to run the IP, mm-hmm. and then we do. So the IP is simply a process called induced polarization, running charge into the ground, current into the ground, and things like sulfides will soak up that charge and retain it for a few extra milliseconds beyond what standard rock would. So it tells you that there's likely an accretion or significant abundance of sulfides in the area versus the background rocks. But they can also be explained by things like graphite and specular hematite, which we haven't seen too much evidence of the graphite in the area, so we're not too worried about that with regards to our particular things. But ultimately, the IP has generated these maps of accumulations of sulfides over 3 prospects. I think we've tested more than 3, but we've only completed 3 full prospects, which we've wanted to do with the 3D inversion. Mm-hmm. So we cover the prospect properly at close line spacings. And I think there's at least 4 or 5 other ones out there that we need to go back and do in detail. But of those 3, the northern one, Perseverance, is 2 by 1 kilometres in size. Good standard chargeability. It looks like low sulfidation type of linear structures. However, there are epithermal, upper epithermal high sulfidation related alteration observed, but also propylitic alteration that looks more closely related to a potential porphyry feeder to the whole system.
You're seeing the sort of geology that you think should correspond with a light bulb being lit up by the electric current that you've pumped into the ground.
Yeah, exactly. So that's Perseverance. At Loki North, similar thing. Quite discrete chargeability high. So chargeability is the measuring how much of that retained charge in the rock. So again, sulfides associated with big, long quartz veins. These are 6 kilometres long, and you've got 2 sets there. One east-northeast intersecting a north-south fault, and the whole thing's sort of mineralised basically, according to the IP, and it sort of matches what we see on surface. And interestingly there, what we do see on surface across most of that vein or those veins are really up-level low sulfidation epithermal textures, like blade textures, meaning that if there is a well-mineralised system, it's preserved at depth, because that's usually the top of the actual system. That's what we see at the surface. And so seeing a good couple hundred metres of vertical distribution of sulfides in the IP data is exactly what you want for a major epithermal target.
Good size target, good shape, right location.
Yep. Big target. Again, the overall footprint's like 30 or 40 square kilometres, so it is quite large, but it is sort of well constrained to these 2 cross-cutting vein sets. But there are some deeper targets to the north and south that, again, probably represent either a porphyry itself or the top of a porphyry system. And then, of course, there's the big one, the actual big one, Redonculus to the south. These are all on the same structure, so it gives us confidence that's a a fertile structure because you've got these multiple systems. And one thing we didn't mention is associated with all these systems is abundant copper, silver, gold, bismuth, tellurium, selenium, all the right pathfinder elements for again the porphyry to epithermal transition or each end member as well.
So Redonculus is large. What sort of footprint are we talking about?
Redonculus is large. I mean, we're sitting here in the middle of the Melbourne CBD right now, and I'm just looking across the road. We've got a building from the 1860s that was probably funded by the gold rush in Central Victoria, and then right next door we've got the headquarters of BHP, the world's largest mining company, and ultimately Redonculus is about 4 or 5 times the size of the Melbourne CBD. So if you can imagine a footprint that's from St Kilda Beach all the way up to the other side of Melbourne Uni and 5 or 6 kilometres across. It's massive.
Yep.
It's absolutely massive. And it's open. It's still open a little bit to the north, but it's definitely open to the south. So it's a huge footprint and it sits in a geologically really interesting area. And it's, again, extremely high charge abilities associated with lots of abundant sulfides, pyrite particular. So again, this one is looking more like it's probably related to a porphyry system or a high sulfidation epithermal system at the top of a porphyry system. Scale-wise, phenomenal. The closest geochemistry we have, again, high copper, tellurium, selenium, and moly molybdenum.
So what comes next with this, Chris? What's the next step for Plutonic
out
there in the desert?
We're going to put our money where our mouths are and drill some holes. So that's what we're doing.
Some worlds they call it money where your mouth is. Other parts of the world you're putting some part of your body on the line. So it's going to be, it's a big test, but it sounds like there's a lot of confidence in these targets and there's a lot going for them that lines up to say these are worth drilling.
That's right. They're all very high conviction targets, particularly supported by the geochemistry, the geophysics, the structure, and the geology. Where we have it, Redonculus, we don't have geology; it's undercover. But where we do get our closest rocks nearby are, basically ex-massive sulfides and geyserites. So if you can imagine a centre of, around the Taupo volcanic zone, and where you get big geysers spitting out water, these are places that historically you form epithermal systems, basically. So that's sitting up on the top to the side. Massive sulfides have been weathered, but still carry good grades. Again, that's the and then further along from there is the low sulfidation vein at I'm Not a Vampire, which is the first major vein that we came across that I described earlier, basically. So when you incorporate the whole scale of the system, it's well beyond the 4 or 5 times the size of the Melbourne CBD. It's phenomenally large, basically.
Well, it's very exciting to be going out there and testing that. So bring it on. Let's see what next year shows.
Oh, that's exactly right. So not many people, I think, get the opportunity to test something as big as this, or a collection of really large, high conviction targets. And I look forward to doing that next year with our team.
Chris, great to talk to you about Plutonic. We're excited as shareholders of that and what it means for both Lion and Plutonic. I think we've got a great ride coming up there. Really excited about the science and the exploration for next year and beyond. So thanks very much for the chat, mate.
No worries. Thank you for having us in. And everyone out there, Headley's just become the Managing Director of Lion Selection Group. So well done, mate.
Thank you. I appreciate it. No. You heard it here first.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.